The low murmur of the feast rolled through the great hall of the Red Keep like a distant wave breaking on a shore, rising and falling in quiet crescendos of laughter, hushed gossip, and the occasional clink of wine cups. Olenna Tyrell was in no rush to draw attention to herself. She had chosen her seat carefully, close enough to the dais to watch King Aerys II Targaryen, but not so close that her presence would be remarkable. The flickering torches cast long shadows on the walls, their light dancing on the pale marble floors. It was a far cry from Highgarden's more inviting glow. Olenna had always found King's Landing's halls a bit too austere, too stern for her liking. But that was hardly her concern tonight. For all her years, Olenna Tyrell knew how to remain both visible and invisible. She wore a deep emerald gown with a delicate golden lattice around her sleeves, the color chosen to represent House Tyrell without flaunting any ostentation. Her bejeweled headdress, not quite a crown but near enough in the eyes of those who gave it a cursory glance, was subdued for her standards. She had no desire to outshine the royal Targaryens. Not when King Aerys' temper had grown so mercurial. Not when his paranoia was as sharp as a dagger pressed to the throat of anyone who displeased him. Anyone or everyone. In recent months, that had become a very fine line indeed. Her gaze drifted to the dais where Aerys II sat. He was not yet called the Mad King openly, but the realm whispered it. His once bright silver-gold hair was thinning and unkempt. His beard had grown straggly. Aerys' violet eyes, so prized by Targaryens, seemed to sparkle with a hidden mania beneath the torchlight. Next to him, Prince Rhaegar, tall and solemn, made small talk with the nobles who had gathered for the feast. Rhaegar's presence always cast a spell of sorts. Handsome, dignified, and more learned than most lords half his age, he was said to have inherited the best of the Targaryen line. It was whispered he might be the realm's redemption once he took the throne. But Olenna Tyrell had learned the hard way never to put faith in the fantasies of princes. She had seen too many heirs, too many golden boys, too many illusions. She knew that madness could run deep, and blood did not always wash it away. She also knew the unspoken truths of the realm. How the Tyrells were viewed with faint disdain by the older, more established houses. The Tyrell line, they said, had served as stewards in the Age of Heroes and had ascended to high lordship only after the Targaryens razed the continent. Their loyalty to the Iron Throne was always the question that hovered in every subtle glance. In every vaguely insulting remark a Lannister or a Baratheon might slip behind a courteous smile. The Tyrells were rich, but they did not have the ancient storied lineage of the Starks or the Aarons, nor the raw power of the Baratheons. Even the Tullys, with their river-laced alliances, were sometimes seen as more prestigious. But Olenna had never been one to cower in the face of rumor or dismissal. That night she had a very specific plan. It was only half formed in her own mind, but the seeds of it had been growing in her thoughts for months. The realm had grown too accustomed to King Aerys' erratic rule. Brutal punishments, secret fires in the dungeons, suspicious accusations of treason. Men and women had begun to vanish in his presence, or worse, burn. Her own granddaughter, though Marjorie was not yet born, for this moment in time Olenna thought simply of future generations of her house, would one day face the consequences of a realm ruined by a mad Targaryen. Olenna would not allow House Tyrell to be exposed to that kind of danger, not if she could help it. So tonight, as King Aerys sipped from his wine cup, played with his food, and barked occasionally at a servant, Olenna watched him closely. She paid attention to the intervals between the sips of wine, the moment when he would swallow and then reach for a fresh cup. She listened for the pattern in his coughs. She had arranged with a sympathetic member of the Red Keep's kitchen staff, someone who owed the Tyrells a small fortune and had other troubles besides, to ensure that the king's goblet would come to him last from the serving line. Even a trifling detail like that might buy her a few seconds to manage the small packet concealed within her skirt. Within it lay the strangest mixture of toxins. Subtle, quick to act but slow enough to pass for a natural failing if one were not scrutinizing too closely. Cresses from Dorne, a pinch of strangler from the east, and a swirl of ghost grass from beyond the seas. None of it was strong enough alone to kill outright, but the combination, or so she had arranged, would lead to a slow unraveling inside the body. She could not trust Pycelle. The Grand Maester was all but worthless, a Lannister creature, so rumor held. He would twist and turn for whichever direction the wind blew from Casterly Rock or the throne. He might suspect something if the king took ill suddenly, but Olenna had prepared for that as well. House Tyrell had certain influences that could secure testimony from healers who would attest to Aerys' ill health. The Mad King had not exactly hidden his fits or paranoia from the realm. The long nights in the library, the unkempt hair, the mania. There was enough there to paint a convincing portrait of a man whose body was finally succumbing to the same fate as his mind. But she also knew the risk. Kings did not die easily or quietly without suspicion. If her plan went awry, House Tyrell might be implicated in regicide, and that was a dangerous game indeed. With the Targaryens weakened, the question would be, who ruled next? Would Rhaegar ascend unchallenged? Could he see through such a plot? Olenna had weighed that cost for months, measuring in the back of her mind how best to proceed, how to sow confusion, how to protect her house at the same time. But each time she found the balance tilting in the same direction. Aerys was dangerous to everyone, not just to the Tyrells, but to each High Lord and Lady in the Seven Kingdoms. Aerys' mania would lead to open warfare soon enough, and better to act decisively before war swept across the realm in a tide of blood. She took a careful sip from her own cup, letting the bitter red settle on her tongue. She had prepared this face for the evening. Polite, mildly amused, perhaps a bit bored. The perfect mask of an older lady at court who had seen too much pageantry to be dazzled by yet another feast. She let her eyes roam to Rhaegar again. He spoke quietly to his wife, Elia Martell of Dorne. Elia's dark eyes seemed tired, though she managed a polite smile whenever a courteous word was offered. Olenna suspected that Elia's own position was precarious. Aerys' unpredictability weighed heavily upon the princess as well. There were whispers of Aerys taking offense at the very idea that Rhaegar had married a Dornish woman. Some said the king had wanted a match with the free cities to secure further trade alliances or foreign gold. Others insisted he had been in favor of the marriage originally, but that in his madness he had turned against it. It was difficult to glean truth from rumor these days, but Olenna read enough to know that Elia's health had been fragile, that some questioned her ability to bear another child, and that Aerys took every shift in the wind as a potential threat. Yet Rhaegar remained composed, serious, a touch somber, wearing the polished courtesy of a man who saw too many burdens placed upon him. Olenna wondered if he had any suspicions about what might happen in the days to come. Did he see how precarious the realm was under his father? If so, he gave no open sign. Rhaegar had always been rumored to be more scholar than soldier. She had heard stories of him weeping over the ruins of Summerhall, composing songs and reading dusty scrolls about prophecies long forgotten. She also knew he could fight when necessary. His prowess with the sword and lance was not as legendary as some, but the realm still remembered that grand tourney at Harrenhal not so many years back, how he had won it all with grace. She let her gaze drift elsewhere. The great hall was filled with a tapestry of noble faces. Men and women dressed in their house colors, speaking in hushed tones, laughing when it was safe to laugh. Olenna spotted Tywin Lannister, the former hand of the king, sitting near the dais with that implacable look of his, a statue carved of ice-cold pride. Lord Tywin rarely smiled these days, and when he did it was more a sneer, a silent promise of retribution. Olenna had no love for the Lannisters, yet she occasionally felt a strange sympathy for Tywin, who had served Aerys so diligently only to be humiliated again and again, overshadowed at court. Aerys had ridiculed him publicly, refused to let his daughter marry Prince Rhaegar. The man had endured too many slights for a proud lion of the rock. She wondered what Tywin would do if given the chance to rid the realm of the Mad King. The rumors that he might rebel outright had floated through the halls for years, yet so far, Tywin had bided his time. In another corner, the Baratheons, young Robert, broad-shouldered and laughing loudly at some jest, while his younger brother Stannis sat stony-faced beside him. Renly, too young to be present, had not come, but Robert was here, cutting a big, boisterous figure in the hall. He was not yet the rebel he would become in other timelines, though she had no doubt he bristled under Targaryen rule. His father, Steffan, had died at sea on a fool's errand for Aerys, leaving Robert a ward of Lord John Arryn in the Vale. She could see the raw strength in Robert's arms, the black hair so reminiscent of the Baratheon line, and a certain rashness in his eyes that might spark into violence. Next to him, Eddard Stark, quiet and dour, the wolf of the North in youth. The two had been wards together, forging a brotherhood of sorts. Already, small alliances and bonds were woven among the younger generation. Olenna recognized how quickly such threads could become nooses around a king's neck if tensions rose. All of this was in her mind as she felt the moment arrive. Aerys reached for his goblet again, sniffed at it suspiciously, then took a small sip. She watched him swallow, watched him wait. He smacked his lips and grimaced at the taste, but took another swallow anyway. Olenna Tyrell glanced away, taking her own sip to look casual. The poison was administered. He would not collapse on the spot. That was not how this mixture worked. It would begin as a subtle irritant, traveling through his bloodstream, putting pressure on his heart, and eventually, in days, perhaps a handful at most, it would bring on a fever that any fool could see as a natural fit. Or so she hoped. She allowed herself a quiet breath of relief and forced her mind to keep calm. The true challenge lay ahead. In the hours and days to come, Aerys would grow ill. That might send the court into an uproar. For all his madness, he was still the king, and each house would scramble to position itself favorably before Rhaegar became king. Tywin Lannister might try to reassert himself or place spies near the new throne. The Baratheons might sense an opportunity to strike if the Targaryen line showed weakness. House Tyrell's role could be crucial. They were the wardens of the south and held tremendous wealth and grain. A new king, Rhaegar or some other claimant, would need that support. She felt a sudden pang of something akin to guilt. Olenna had never liked killing, not in the sense of wanton bloodshed, and not when it involved a king. The risk was too high, the cost too dear. Yet she reminded herself that if Aerys continued to rule, war was inevitable. Perhaps the entire realm would burn. She was preventing a greater tragedy, or so she told herself. Aerys coughed. Olenna's ears perked up, though she kept her face neutral. The cough did not sound too unusual, but in that moment she saw Prince Rhaegar glance at his father in mild concern. So it begins, she thought, the subtle unraveling. When the feast ended, the lords and ladies departed in small clusters. Olenna made sure to pay her respects to the king and prince on her way out. She offered Aerys the standard courtesies, dipping her head ever so slightly and speaking a soft pleasantry. If his mind was as scattered as rumored, he might not remember what she said. He coughed again and barely responded. Olenna stepped away, blending into the shuffle of bodies heading toward the doors and out into the courtyard. It was a cool evening. A breeze drifted in from Blackwater Bay, carrying the salty tang of the sea. She let that air fill her lungs, hoping it would carry away the stench of what she had just done. In her chambers that night, Olenna did not sleep easily. She lay awake, eyes drifting to the moonlight that poured through the narrow windows. She thought of Mace Tyrell, her son, who was still in Highgarden overseeing matters of harvest and law. She thought of Luther, her late husband, and how he had left her with a house that was wealthy but fragile in the politics of the realm. And she thought of the days to come. If Aerys died, would Rhaegar prove any saner? If the Targaryen dynasty tottered, would it collapse? There was Prince Viserys, still a boy, and the infant Daenerys, but they were too young to hold the throne. Rhaegar was the key. Olenna wondered how the other great lords would react. Would they accept Rhaegar's rule peaceably, or would they sense an opportunity to seize power? She rose before dawn, more tired than she liked, and went about her day. The Red Keep's hallways were abuzz with servants preparing for yet another day of petitioners and councils. She passed Grand Maester Pycelle in one corridor. He bobbed a bow to her, a courteous greeting. She returned it, noticing the suspicion in his eyes, or perhaps that was her own paranoia. Another wave of guilt threatened to rise in her chest, but she squelched it. There was no turning back. By midday, rumors began to spread that King Aerys had taken ill in the night, that he was coughing blood and burning with fever. Some said the king had been cursed by a witch from the woods beyond the Trident, Others insisted it was retribution for his cruelty. The more practical among the court believed it was simply the result of his poor constitution, worsened by nights with little sleep and fraught nerves. Olenna made sure to be seen looking concerned but not overly so. She allowed a few passing remarks about how the king had seemed in declining health for some time, how unfortunate it was. She always referred to Aerys with deference, His Grace, making her concern appear sincere. Over the next 2 days, the king's condition worsened rapidly. He remained confined to his rooms, occasionally shrieking at the servants who tried to feed him, demanding they keep the fires burning hot. The entire Red Keep seemed to hold its breath. Rhaegar paced the corridors, deep worry etched in his face. Even Robert Baratheon was subdued. Tywin Lannister lingered near the council chambers, his expression unreadable. Eddard Stark remained quiet, but he and Robert continued to share meaningful glances. Elia Martell tried to remain stoic at her husband's side, but her anxiety was plain to see. Grand Maester Pycelle emerged on the second evening to address the court that had assembled in the throne room, waiting for news. With a somber air, Pycelle announced that the king was in grave condition. "Though we do all in our power to restore his grace's health," he intoned, "we must pray for his swift recovery." Olenna wondered if Pycelle suspected anything deeper. He had studied the king's condition closely, no doubt, but she had left no easy trace. Unless Pycelle discovered that the king's innards were shutting down in ways unnatural, he might blame it on a sudden flux of the humors or the stress of mania. The next morning, Aerys died. Word spread through the Red Keep in hushed, frantic whispers. The king was dead. May the gods have mercy on his soul. That was the refrain in the corridors, half awe, half relief. For all the uncertainty, something like a collective exhalation passed through the keep. The tension that had reigned there for years, fueled by the king's cruelty and paranoia, began to dissolve, though in its place came a new wariness. Who would stand for or against Prince Rhaegar? It was late afternoon when the lords and ladies were summoned to the throne room. Olenna Tyrell took her position among the great houses, standing with a small retinue of Tyrell guards and courtiers. Silence settled over them all when Rhaegar Targaryen entered. He wore black and red, the colors of House Targaryen, but his face was ashen with grief. His hair, so much like his father's had once been, shone silver in the torchlight. As he walked toward the Iron Throne, he looked neither left nor right. Elia Martell followed at a respectful distance, also in dark attire. When he reached the throne, Rhaegar turned to face the assembled lords. With slow, deliberate steps, he ascended the iron steps. Olenna studied his expression. There was sorrow there, but also a firm resolve. If he was grieving, he would not let it compromise his claim. This was the moment the realm had anticipated for years. Rhaegar Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, stepping into his inheritance. Yet the tension was palpable. He paused at the top step, letting his gaze sweep the hall, as if searching for anyone who might dare to dispute him. No one spoke. Tywin Lannister stood rigid. Robert Baratheon shifted his weight. Eddard Stark remained impassive. Stannis Baratheon was off to one side, his face blank but his jaw clenched. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," Grand Maester Pycelle began, his voice somewhat trembling, "I do proclaim Rhaegar of the House Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Protector of the Realm." The formalities continued, echoing through the grand hall. Rhaegar lowered himself onto the Iron Throne. His eyes flicked across the courtiers. Olenna Tyrell dipped a curtsy along with the rest. The air in the throne room felt thick with unspoken words, unspoken possibilities. This was a new era. The Mad King was gone, and Rhaegar now wore the crown. In the flurry of the following days, Olenna worked subtly to ensure the Tyrells positioned themselves wisely. She had her cousin, the ponderous but well-read Lord Theo Tyrell, meet discreetly with Rhaegar's close advisors. The message was clear. Highgarden stood ready to support the new king in every capacity. Of course, the Tyrells would want to preserve their seat in the south, their rights to the fertile fields, and a voice in King's Landing. Olenna made certain that little hints of gold financial assistance were offered to smooth any anxieties about grain prices or the supply lines that fed the city. The capital needed bread. The Reach could supply it. Better to cement the new king's goodwill early. Rhaegar, for his part, seemed to take up the reins of governance with a seriousness that many found refreshing. He replaced some of his father's more notorious advisors, not all at once, but swiftly enough. Varys remained in the Red Keep, playing his cryptic game of whispers, but men like Carlton Chelsted and Rossart, rumored to be pyromancers too close to the old king's destructive impulses, vanished from court. Quietly, Rhaegar also showed an inclination to consult with men like Jon Arryn, who was well respected across the realm, and even with Tywin Lannister, for all the history between Tywin and Aerys. Rhaegar needed Tywin's gold, Lannister power, and the veneer of legitimacy that came Tacha's strong hand. But the new king did not formally name a hand immediately. He listened, observed, and kept his own counsel. Some in the realm spoke of Rhaegar's gentler nature. The young king was said to be deeply concerned with prophecy and the welfare of the common folk, a combination that perplexed many lords. They expected a man who would plan wars, subdue rebellions, manage alliances with a firm grip. Instead, rumor said Rhaegar spent hours reading ancient tomes on the long night, discussing them with Maester Aemon at the Citadel by Raven, or strumming his silver-stringed harp. Yet others recalled the Harrenhal tourney, how Rhaegar had defeated formidable knights with a calm, almost sorrowful air. He was not a man to be underestimated. In that shifting landscape, Olenna kept a careful ear to the ground. She listened to how Robert Baratheon spat curses sometimes in the courtyard when the Targaryen name was mentioned. She noticed the grim set of Eddard Stark's mouth whenever the conversation turned to old grudges. She saw the way Tywin Lannister measured every word, watching for any hint that he might regain or lose influence. And she saw the swirl of rumor that threatened to overshadow Rhaegar's coronation, the question of whether the Targaryen line had been cursed by the father's madness, and whether it might strike again. All of this told her that the realm was balanced on a knife's edge. One misstep and it could plunge into chaos. Yet for a time, it seemed as though the Seven Kingdoms might finally know peace and stable rule. Rhaegar began to reorganize the courts of justice, issuing small but meaningful reforms to limit the brutality that his father had once unleashed. He extended a conciliatory hand to Dorne, mindful of Elaya's homeland, seeking to soothe any bitterness remaining from the past. The Martells seemed mollified at least in part by the new king's courtesy. To the north, Rhaegar offered to confirm the old pacts and privileges of House Stark, ensuring that the North would remain largely autonomous in its traditional ways. Eddard Stark accepted quietly, though he was not effusive in his praise. In the Vale, Jon Arryn declared his support for the new king wholeheartedly. In the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister bent the knee with rigid formality. The Riverlands, sworn to Riverrun and House Tully, followed suit, as did the Stormlands under the Baratheons. The Crownlands themselves were, of course, beholden to the king's rule. Lastly, Highgarden recognized Rhaegar with a flourish of courtesy and promise of grain shipments. It was a graceful dance, and for a few moons, the realm looked almost placid. The memory of Aerys' savage outbursts and random burnings seemed to dissipate in the face of this new reign, which was gentler, more measured. Olenna Tyrell, from her vantage point, saw that Prince Viserys, still a boy, grew quieter in the shadow of his older brother. Daenerys was far too young to have any sense of what was happening around her. Elia seemed relieved, as though a weight had lifted, and yet the king himself, Rhaegar, walked as if carrying the burden of a prophecy no one else could see. There were rumors, too, that he was uneasy in his marriage, that he believed a third child must be born of fire and blood, that some ancient text foretold a savior. Olenna did not trouble herself too much with these rumors, but she tucked them away. She had learned long ago that sometimes the strangest whispers had a kernel of truth. If all had remained calm, perhaps Olenna's plan would have simply ushered in a more peaceful Targaryen reign, and the realm would have known a lasting tranquility. But that was seldom the way of the Seven Kingdoms. Trouble came from an unexpected quarter. Some among the Targaryen loyalists, especially those fanatically devoted to Aerys II, began to suspect foul play in the king's death. The raven that arrived in King's Landing one morning carried a cryptic message. Aerys was murdered. The vile seeds come from the south. It was unsigned, but rumors pointed to a certain alliance of lesser lords, possibly those with ties to House Targaryen going back to the conquest. Whispers claimed that a small circle of conspirators believed Rhaegar or his allies had hastened the king's death. Naturally, they sought proof or vengeance. Rhaegar seemed troubled by these rumors, though in public he denied them. "My father was ill," he would say calmly. "He wasted away before our eyes. It was the gods' will. I would do nothing so dishonorable as to hasten my own father's demise." In a strictly legal sense, that was true. Rhaegar himself had done nothing. Olenna had made sure of that. The burden of guilt lay with her alone, and a few Tyrell agents who knew enough to keep silent. But what if someone discovered her part in this? It seemed unlikely, but the Red Keep's walls had ears, and men like Varys specialized in unearthing secrets. Olenna found herself watching the spider more closely, trying to glean whether he harbored suspicions. For now, he seemed indifferent, continuing his usual murmurs in Rhaegar's ear about plots across the narrow sea, or bandit raids in the Riverlands. If he knew Olenna's secret, he gave no sign. But she never forgot the cunning of the eunuch. He had outlived more than one regime and would likely outlive more still. Far more tangible was the restlessness rising among the great lords. Some of them grumbled that King Rhaegar's reign was too soft. For instance, Robert Baratheon found fewer excuses to linger at court, more reasons to return to Storm's End, where rumor said he trained night and day with the warhammer he'd come to favor. The laughter he'd once boomed at feasts grew less frequent. Eddard Stark eventually departed for the north, speaking of the obligations he held to Winterfell, but Olenna suspected some unspoken dissatisfaction with the new king. Tywin Lannister watched everything from Casterly Rock, investing in new gold mines, raising fresh contingents of soldiers. For the realm's security, it was said, but everyone knew Tywin did little without a plan. What truly shook King's Landing, though, was a small but significant rebellion in the Stormlands led by a minor noble who claimed Targaryen ancestry. House Fell, apparently disgruntled by a verdict passed by Rhaegar's justices on a land dispute, declared that Rhaegar's rule was illegitimate. They claimed the line of succession should have passed to a different Targaryen branch, some distant cousin who might be living in obscurity, or so they said. The king swiftly declared the rebellion treasonous, raised royal forces, and marched to quell it. Many houses in the Stormlands remained loyal to Rhaegar, but Robert's stance was uncertain. He had no love for the Targaryens, but he also had no wish to challenge the might of the Iron Throne alone. In the end, Robert marched with Rhaegar, grudgingly leading a contingent of Stormlanders to put down the rebels. The campaign was short but revealed much. Rhaegar, though not as brutish a warrior as Robert, was still a capable commander. He led from the front with a solemn grace. Robert's hammer smashed the rebellious knights, while Rhaegar's bannermen encircled them, forcing a swift surrender. The rebellious lord was brought before King Rhaegar, trembling and wounded. If it had been Aerys, the man would have burned alive in the courtyard. But Rhaegar, though he condemned the man's treachery, merely stripped him of lands and titles and sent him to the wall. Robert, it was said, found this punishment too lenient, but none could say the new king was unjust. It was an act designed to show mercy while upholding authority. When the king returned victorious, the realm breathed a sigh of relief, though tensions still simmered. Olenna Tyrell quietly observed the fiasco from High Garden, where she had traveled on the pretext of overseeing her house's affairs. She was thankful her name had not surfaced in any conspiracy theories regarding the Mad King's death. If the Targaryen loyalists sought a scapegoat, they did not seem to be pointing fingers at the Tyrells, at least not openly. Rhaegar needed the Reach's support, so accusing them of regicide would have been counterproductive unless ironclad proof was found, and so the illusions persisted. In time, Rhaegar attempted to unify the realm further by organizing a grand council in King's Landing. He invited all the major lords to attend, to reaffirm their loyalty and to discuss certain reforms. Chief among them was a plan to curtail the crown's direct interference in local lordship disputes. Olenna found the notion cunning. By offering a measure of autonomy to the great lords, Rhaegar hoped to soothe lingering resentments. It also meant the crown was relinquishing some immediate power, hoping to secure greater loyalty in the long run. The irony was that the realm had known more direct control under the tyrannical Aerys, but that had been exercised so erratically as to alienate everyone. The lords arrived in a steady stream, their retinues swelling the streets of King's Landing. The city bustled with commerce, from the fishmongers at the docks to the goldsmiths near the Street of Steel. Street performers hawked illusions, hoping to gather coin from the out-of-town visitors. Taverns overflowed. For a time, the capital enjoyed a festive air, reminiscent of the tournaments of old. Olenna Tyrell, accompanied by her son Mace, a pompous but not entirely useless man, led a respectable train of Tyrell knights and ladies into the city. She greeted old acquaintances, exchanged pleasantries with many, and carefully studied everyone's mood. Robert Baratheon came, but without the boisterous energy that once defined him. He wore his black hair and beard longer, and there was a subdued anger behind his blue eyes. Eddard Stark, present as well, seemed as silent as ever. The Tullys were represented by Lord Hoster Tully and his daughters, Catelyn and Lisa, both there to witness the spectacle. Tywin Lannister arrived with regal precision, accompanied by his golden-haired children, Cersei and Jaime. Tyrion, the youngest, was nowhere to be seen, perhaps left at Casterly Rock. Tyrion's presence sometimes caused discomfort at court. To everyone's surprise, Rhaegar's first act at the council was to name a new hand of the king. Many expected him to pick Tywin Lannister, bridging the gap left by the old grudges. Others thought he might choose Jon Arryn, given the man's impeccable reputation. Instead, Rhaegar named Prince Doran Martell of Dorne. It was an unprecedented choice, but it made sense in the context of his marriage to Elia Martell and his desire to bring Dorne more fully into the realm's fold. Doran Martell was known to be patient, intelligent, and measured. Some of the older lords, especially from the Reach, bristled at the notion of a Dornish hand. But it was a bold signal. Rhaegar intended to unify the realm through inclusion rather than fear. Aerys' legacy of terror was over. It did not please everyone. Tywin Lannister's face was a mask of composure, but Olenna saw the flicker in his eyes, a flash of wounded pride. Robert Baratheon frowned so deeply one might think his features would be permanently etched into a scowl. Eddard Stark had no open reaction, though a brief glance passed between him and Robert. The Tullys looked uncertain, as though they were trying to gauge the wind. The next days of the council were filled with debates. Rhaegar proposed the establishment of an advisory council made up of representatives from each region, an idea that had more in common with the old councils than with absolute monarchy. The king argued it would help bring transparency to royal decrees. Some lords argued that the crown was weakening itself and that each region should remain subject to the king's direct will. Others, notably some from the north and the Vale, supported the notion of local autonomy. Olenna Tyrell spoke little, allowing Mace to prattle politely about the importance of trade and harvests, but she was ever watchful. This was the new shape of the realm, being forged before her eyes, and she saw the tension that lurked beneath it all. One evening, she found herself in a small solar, apart from the main gathering, nursing a cup of sweet wine. The day's discussions had run long, and she needed a moment's respite from the swirl of court politics. The walls of the solar were lined with books, some dusty with disuse. A single candle flickered on a polished oak table. The faint smell of parchment and old leather gave the room a scholarly calm that contrasted sharply with the heated debates of the council hall. She nearly jumped when a figure stepped inside. Varys the Spider, the master of whisperers, bowed low in that obsequious manner he had perfected. "Lady Olenna," he cooed, in that soft voice, "forgive me if I startled you. I was merely looking for a moment's peace among all these dusty tomes. I did not realize the Queen of Thorns would be occupying the very space I sought." Olenna said softly, "Come, Varys, let us dispense with pretenses. You rarely do anything by accident. If you've come to speak with me, say so plainly. I'm in no mood for mincing words after today's council session." Varys smiled, showing no offense. "Ah, my lady, you know me too well. Indeed, I wish to speak with you, if I may, merely to discuss the future of the realm under our noble King Rhaegar." She took a measured sip of her wine. Discuss, or fish for secrets? He spread his hands, as if to say the difference was immaterial. "We all serve the realm, do we not?" She allowed herself a wry smile. "Some of us serve it more carefully than others." "Just so," he agreed. He moved to stand near the wall, running a finger along the spine of a book. "The realm stands at a crossroads, my lady. The rebellious murmurs that plagued the Stormlands have been quelled for now, but there is discontent simmering. King Rhaegar's progressive ideas please some and dismay others. You, I suspect, have your own perspective on how best to see the Tyrell name prosper in these uncertain times." She fixed him with a steady gaze. "The Tyrells will do as they have always done. Support the crown, provide bread and roses, sow the fields in spring, reap them in autumn. You'll find no rebellious hearts in Highgarden." Varys inclined his head. "I am most glad to hear it. The new king has great hopes for a more unified kingdom. But in my line of work, one hears many curious things. Whispers that the death of King Aerys may not have been entirely natural. Perhaps you have heard such rumors yourself." Olenna kept her face impassive, though her pulse quickened. "Aerys was a raving lunatic toward the end, a man in poor health driven by mania. Rumors will swirl. I pay them no mind." Varys paused, letting the silence stretch. "Of course. Still, it is always wise to keep one's ears open. If any were found responsible, particularly any highborn or any house, that might endanger the stability our new king hopes to foster. Treason, regicide, the gravest of crimes." He let the implication hang. Olenna forced a bland smile. "Indeed, let us hope no such monstrous betrayal is discovered. It would be a stain on the entire realm." Varys's lips curved in a slight bow of amusement. "Well said, my lady." He dipped another bow. "I shall leave you to your quiet. The day has been long, and there is so much more to do." She watched him glide away, feeling her heart hammer in her chest. Did Varys suspect? Perhaps. But then, Varys suspected everyone of something. That was his nature. The question was whether he had any proof, or whether he simply enjoyed planting seeds of doubt. She resolved to stay calm. She was not the only one who had reasons to see Aerys gone, not by a long shot. Tywin Lannister's old grudge was infamous. Robert Baratheon's family tragedies were known. Even the Martells had reason to hate Aerys for his scorn of Elia. Olenna might be just one figure among many. Still, she would remain vigilant. The council continued for several more days, culminating in a grand feast to celebrate the near conclusion of Rhaegar's reforms. King Rhaegar himself presided, wearing a golden circlet set with rubies. Elia Martell sat by his side, looking frail but content enough, while Prince Viserys and young Princess Daenerys were not present in the hall. Too young, presumably, or simply better kept away from the chaos of a feast. The lords and ladies drank, exchanged courtesies, and tried to outdo one another with tales of valor or hospitality. A small tension still hung in the air, the knowledge that not all hearts were in harmony. But for one evening, at least, appearances were kept. Mace Tyrell puffed his chest, boasting of Highgarden's beauty, while Hoster Tully praised the bounty of the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister said little, though his children circulated among the crowd, young Cersei flashing a practiced smile, Jaime in his white Kingsguard cloak. He had been named to the Kingsguard in this alternate timeline, though at a slightly different juncture than under Aerys. Jaime's pride in his role was evident, though Olenna wondered if he missed the freedoms of a young knight. She also noted the awkward glances Cersei shot at Rhaegar, as though remembering the old rumor that once, Tywin had wanted her betrothed to Rhaegar. That was an ambition denied by Aerys, but perhaps in a different world it might have come to pass. The feast ended without incident. As people began to depart, she spotted Robert Baratheon leaning against a column, glowering into his cup of wine. She considered approaching him for a polite word, but decided against it. The man's mood was not inviting. Instead, she slipped away toward the exit, where the torches lit the corridor leading back to her chambers. She felt the long day in her bones and wished for little more than a moment's peace before traveling back to Highgarden on the morrow. The next dawn brought more subtle shifts. The council concluded with a formal declaration of King Rhaegar's new reforms. An advisory council representing each region would meet twice a year, or more frequently if summoned by the king, to address major disputes, taxation, and laws. Nobles in each region would have somewhat more autonomy in local governance, though the king retained ultimate authority. The entire realm was to be bound by these reforms, which Rhaegar hoped would lessen the chance of uprising. Many lords and ladies departed King's Landing, bearing new charters and uncertain hearts. Olenna Tyrell left with her retinue, heading back to the Reach with Mace and the others. On the road, they passed caravans of merchants, knights returning home, and the occasional entertainer who had profited from the influx of visitors to the capital. The nights were cool, the fields green with the promise of a bountiful harvest. Olenna took quiet solace in the fact that, for the moment, House Tyrell seemed safe. Her efforts to get rid of Aerys had not been exposed, and the new king had no reason to distrust Highgarden. That was, she feared, only the beginning of the story. On the horizon, countless variables loomed. Would Rhaegar's reforms take root, or would they incite further rebellions among those who yearned for a stronger or more brutal monarchy? House Lannister surely chafed at not being named hand, and Tywin was not a man to let a perceived slight go unanswered forever. Robert Baratheon's bitterness was a tinderbox that might one day ignite, especially if he found a reason, like old rumors that Rhaegar had shown interest in Lyanna Stark at Harrenhal, though that event was overshadowed by the timeline changes. Still, hearts rarely forgot old attractions or humiliations. In Highgarden, Olenna resumed her daily routines, presiding over matters of estate management, ensuring the orchard yields were properly accounted for, and corresponding with allies near and far. She penned letters to King Rhaegar's court, affirming House Tyrell's support. Occasionally, she received ravens from Lannisport or Riverrun discussing trade agreements. She orchestrated betrothals for lesser Tyrell cousins, forging new ties. And every so often, she allowed her mind to drift back to that night in King's Landing, the moment she had slipped poison into the Mad King's cup. It was a memory that brought her neither pride nor regret. She saw it as a necessity, a single black deed that spared the realm from a far greater calamity. For some months, peace endured. The small folk in the Reach prospered under the gentle climate, reaping good harvests. Mace Tyrell postured about hosting a grand tournament in Highgarden to honor the new king's reign, which Olenna agreed might be a fine show of loyalty. The initial planning began, and invitations would soon be sent. Then, news arrived that would shake the kingdom. Rhaegar Targaryen, so the messenger said, intended to annul his marriage to Elia Martell and seek another bride. The reason was couched in talk of prophecy and the need for a third child of pure Targaryen blood, or some nonsense about the prince that was promised. The realm's tongues wagged at once. Elia Martell had borne him 2 children, but her health was frail, and the rumor was she could not bear another child without risking her life. Perhaps Rhaegar, consumed by the old Targaryen obsession with prophecy, had decided that to fulfill the legends, he needed a new wife. Or perhaps other forces at court pressed him to secure a different marriage alliance. The immediate effect of this announcement was political chaos. Dorne, outraged at the possibility of Elia being cast aside, threatened to secede or, at least, to break alliances. Prince Doran Martell, who served as hand of the king, found his position untenable. The entire impetus for a Dornish hand had been the royal marriage. Now that was in jeopardy, and any perceived slight could lead to open conflict with Dorne. This was precisely the kind of upheaval Olenna had feared. The new king, for all his idealism, might tear the realm apart in a different way than his father had. She watched from Highgarden as ravens flew back and forth between Sunspear and the Red Keep. Some said that Rhaegar had grown close to a northern lady, but the details were scarce. Others insisted it was a plot to unite with House Velaryon to preserve Targaryen blood. The gossip changed from day to day, each rumor more outlandish than the last. Regardless of who the new bride might be, if Rhaegar indeed sought an annulment, it would enrage Dorne. The Martells had never fully forgiven the Targaryens for past grievances, but Alya's marriage had done much to bind them to the crown. A dissolution of that union would be seen as a betrayal, an insult. The question was whether Dorne would fight for Alya's honor. And if the South erupted in conflict, how would the rest of the realm respond? Could the Lannisters, the Baratheons, or even the Starks stay out of it? War might well come, though this time sparked by romantic prophecy rather than raw tyranny. It was then that Olenna recognized the bitter irony. She had acted to save the realm from the horrors of Aerys too, but the Targaryen madness might take another shape in Rhaegar's obsessive pursuit of destiny. The seeds of war were being planted again, though slower, quieter, perhaps more politely. A man enthralled by prophecy could be just as dangerous as a king enthralled by flames. Yet she did not lose hope entirely. She still believed Rhaegar was a better man than his father, kinder, more thoughtful. If he could be persuaded to set aside his prophecy-laden ambitions, to mend ties with Dorne, to keep the realm intact, perhaps there would be no war. But it would be a delicate dance indeed, especially with the memory of the Mad King so fresh in people's minds. House Martell, feeling betrayed, might attempt to rally other great houses to depose Rhaegar in favor of Viserys or even a distant Targaryen cousin. Robert Baratheon, if given a righteous cause, like defending the honor of a woman cast aside, might find it reason enough to raise the banners. Olenna Tyrell weighed all these possibilities and found she could only do what she had always done. Watch, listen, maneuver quietly, and protect her own. She had no illusions that she could control Rhaegar's decisions, but she could attempt to shape the consequences by building alliances. She wrote letters to the Martells, expressing her sympathy for Alya's plight while carefully avoiding blame for the king's actions. She subtly reached out to House Redwyne, House Hightower, House Tarly, reminding them that peace in the Reach was paramount and that if the realm fell into civil war, their lands would be the breadbasket fueling one side or the other. She reminded them that if they remained united under Tyrell leadership, the rest of the realm would not dare ignore their voice. Above all, she kept her own role in Aerys' death deeply buried. For if war came, regicide could be used by any side as an excuse to settle old scores. She did not fear personal disgrace so much as she feared House Tyrell's downfall if the truth were discovered. For now, that secret remained hidden in the gloom of the Red Keep's memory, overshadowed by new intrigues and alliances. As the months turned again, the king's rumored annulment remained just that, a rumor. But tensions simmered at court. Prince Doran Martell was said to have grown cold toward Rhaegar, fulfilling his duties as hand with the barest politeness. Alya's health worsened. Some speculated Rhaegar might be waiting for her death, so no annulment would be necessary. Cruel talk, but the realm's tongues never lacked cruelty. In response, the Martells quietly strengthened their hold on the Prince's Pass and the Boneway, the two major routes into Dorne, as though preparing for conflict. Then, at a tourney in Lannisport, hosted by Tywin Lannister to celebrate the completion of some grand new project, the realm's lords gathered again. King Rhaegar attended with a grand retinue, while Queen Elia stayed behind, too ill to travel. Doran Martell did not come, pleading urgent duties. Robert Baratheon was there, though he was said to have spent half the time in brothels, drowning some private sorrow in ale and the arms of whores. Eddard Stark came, quietly observing, seldom participating. The Tyrells sent a party led by Mace Tyrell and a handful of knights, Olenna traveling as part of the retinue out of curiosity and caution. During the final day of jousting, an incident erupted that many would later claim was the spark that ignited a second major crisis. Rhaegar himself competed in the lists, unseating several knights with a skillful lance. In the final tilt, he faced Ser Barristan Selmy, the legendary knight of the Kingsguard. A hush fell over the crowd as these two famed warriors charged at each other. Rhaegar tilted his lance precisely, striking Ser Barristan in the shoulder and unhorsing him. The crowd roared. The king dismounted to tend to the older knight, ensuring he was not gravely injured, a courteous gesture that earned applause. But the real moment of shock came when, instead of riding to hand the victor's laurel to some great lady of the realm, perhaps a gesture to Elia in absentia, Rhaegar took the crown of winter roses from the stand, strode across the field, and presented it to Lyanna Stark, who was sitting among the onlookers with her brother Ned. The crowd froze in stunned silence. It was a scene reminiscent of the Harrenhal tourney in another timeline, but here it occurred in Lannisport under different circumstances. Lyanna Stark looked astonished, her cheeks flushing red. Ned Stark stood in fury, as did Robert Baratheon, who had once been betrothed to Lyanna in the old arrangement. In that single action, Rhaegar ignited every rumor that had been swirling in the realm. That he intended to put Elia aside, that he was enthralled by prophecy demanding a union with a northern woman, or simply enthralled by Lyanna's beauty, that he cared not for the delicate alliances binding the realm. Shouts broke out in the crowd. Robert roared something unintelligible, brandishing a fist at the king. The Lannisters' guards rushed to maintain order. Olenna Tyrell sat in her seat, her heart sinking. She recognized that spark all too well, the spark that could set the kingdoms aflame. Within hours, the tourney was overshadowed by furious arguments in the halls of Casterly Rock. Ned Stark demanded an explanation, outraged on behalf of his sister's honor. Robert Baratheon threatened to kill Rhaegar with his bare hands. Tywin Lannister, as host, tried to calm the lords, but his patience was tested. Rhaegar, for his part, offered no apology. He claimed he meant no disrespect to Elia, but that the crown of winter roses was meant for the northern lady who had impressed him somehow. The specifics of his explanation varied according to rumor. Some said Lyanna had shown him a kindness, or that he believed their union might avert some prophesied doom. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: shock, anger, and the sense that a line had been crossed. That night, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon departed in haste, refusing further hospitality. They rode east, presumably back to the Vale or the north, brimming with fury. Lyanna Stark was whisked away by her brother, though not before Rhaegar's glance followed her out of the courtyard. Tywin Lannister seethed at the insult to his hospitality. Many lesser lords whispered among themselves. Had the king lost his senses? Was the Targaryen madness rearing its head again, this time dressed in chivalry and prophecy? Olenna Tyrell returned to Highgarden once more, feeling that war was now far closer than before. Rhaegar's ill-timed gesture, combined with the unsettled question of Elaya's health and Dorne's pride, seemed a perfect storm. If Robert Baratheon interpreted the king's actions as an insult to his own claim on Lyanna, that might be all the reason he needed to rebel. Ned Stark was no friend of the Targaryens to begin with, and if the North joined with the Stormlands, that alliance would be formidable. The Vale might follow, due to the close ties between Ned and Jon Arryn. The Riverlands, through Hoster Tully, might be drawn in if Ned or Robert sought marriages or alliances there, and so the realm would erupt in blood. Reflecting on the swirl of events, Olenna wondered how differently things might have gone had she not acted to remove Aerys. Possibly the realm would have endured a brutal war under the Mad King's tyranny. Instead, it seemed destined for a different war, one sparked by the romantic folly of Rhaegar Targaryen. She cursed the Targaryens under her breath. They seemed incapable of bringing peace to Westeros, whether by madness or obsession. In the weeks that followed, ravens flew with alarming frequency. Robert Baratheon was said to be gathering men in the Stormlands. Ned Stark returned north, sending out calls to his bannermen. At the same time, Doran Martell threatened to withdraw from King's Landing entirely, outraged that Rhaegar had so blatantly dishonored Elia. Rumors spoke of Targaryen loyalists uneasy with Rhaegar's disregard for tradition. Some might even throw their support behind a younger Targaryen or a different claimant. Tywin Lannister sat at Casterly Rock, waiting and watching to see which side might benefit him most. Meanwhile, Rhaegar retreated to the Red Keep, stating that he sought wise counsel but making few public statements. Gossip claimed he was corresponding with Maester Aemon in the Citadel about some ancient prophecy regarding the prince who was promised and the Song of Ice and Fire. Others speculated that he was preparing a show of force to quell the rebellious stirrings. Yet the king delayed, perhaps hoping the fury would subside. Olenna Tyrell saw the rising storm and knew that House Tyrell would soon have to choose a side if the realm went to war. Mace Tyrell, ever eager to please, thought they should remain loyal to the crown. but others within the Reach pointed out that if too many great houses united against Rhaegar, the Tyrells risked ruin by remaining on his side. The memory of the Field of Fire from centuries past still loomed in the hearts of some. But would Rhaegar's dragons, if he had any, be enough to quell a united rebellion? Or would the Tyrells lose everything if they backed a failing Targaryen cause? The discussion in Highgarden's halls was fraught. In private, Olenna weighed the outcome of her own gambit. She had removed Aerys to prevent the realm from plunging into chaos, yet chaos came anyway, from a different direction. She felt a weary resignation. The Game of Thrones, it seemed, could not be so easily tamed. One king's madness was gone, replaced by another king's ill-conceived idealism. The realm had traded wildfire for romance, but the end might still be war. As the threat of open conflict loomed, the realm stood on the precipice. Through the roads and rivers, through the mountains and the valleys, banners were readied, swords were sharpened. Men prayed to the Seven, or to the old gods in the north, or to the Lord of Light across the narrow sea, each hoping for deliverance. Houses recalled old grievances, old alliances. In King's Landing, the Red Keep's yard filled with soldiers wearing the three-headed dragon. In the Stormlands, Robert Baratheon's thunderous war horns sounded, summoning his bannermen. In the north, the stark direwolf howled. In Dorne, a scorpion stirred under Prince Doran's calm exterior. And in Highgarden, Olenna Tyrell rose from her writing desk, staring out the window at the bright fields of the Reach. She could see in her mind's eye the columns of troops that might soon tread across those fields, trampling the roses of Highgarden underfoot in a war that she had hoped to prevent. Such was the shape of the realm after King Aerys II Targaryen died by her poisoned hand, long before Robert's rebellion might have taken shape as we once knew it, and yet leading down a road that promised a different storm of swords, a different clash of kings. And in her heart, Olenna Tyrell asked herself the same question each evening. Would she have been better off letting the Mad King live? Could it be that she had only changed the names and faces of tragedy, rather than sparing the realm from bloodshed? Yet, as always, she found no certain answer. All she could do was fortify Highgarden, solidify alliances, and prepare for the storms to come. For in the Game of Thrones, even a Queen of Thorns can only shape so much before the vines of fate twist in directions no mortal can fully control. And the Seven Kingdoms, freed from the Mad King, now faced the uncertain reign of a Dreamer King who might just burn the land in pursuit of his illusions. Thus the final die was cast, and war's heavy footfall echoed on the horizon, awaiting only the spark that would set the entire realm aflame. Olenna Tyrell kept her back straight and her chin high as she listened to the roll call of rumors drifting into Highgarden from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. The vernal breezes of the Reach were still gentle, the roses in bloom, the fields flush with the promise of summer's bounty. On the surface, one might think life was uncommonly peaceful behind Highgarden's walls. The orchard paths were quiet, the fountains tinkled in hidden courtyards, and golden sunlight warmed every stone of the castle. Yet beneath that pleasant veneer, tremors ran deep. The entire realm felt poised on a knife's edge, waiting for that next momentous lurch toward chaos. King Rhaegar Targaryen's brazen act at the Lannisport tourney, presenting Lyanna Stark with the crown of winter roses in full view of the assembled lords, had set hearts aflame and tongues wagging. It was no secret that Lyanna Stark had long been betrothed to Robert Baratheon, nor was it a secret that House Stark prized its honor above all else. Worse, Rhaegar had a wife already, Elia Martell, who languished in King's Landing, ill and humiliated. The rumors of a possible annulment, or that Rhaegar believed he needed another bride to fulfill some prophecy, had been swirling for months. Now, with that single public gesture, the king all but confirmed he meant to replace Elia in practice, if not in law. The immediate fallout had come in the form of outraged shouts, hasty departures, and seething resentment among northern and Dornish circles. But that was merely the spark. The question now was what conflagration might follow. Olenna had cultivated her vantage point carefully. From the time she first laid eyes on King Rhaegar's unusual sense of duty and dream-driven obsessions, she had suspected the realm would not be safe under so whimsical a man. Certainly, he was gentler than Aerys, more inclined to music and mystic texts than to cruelty and wildfire. But madness had many faces, and obsession could be just as destructive as rage. She had orchestrated the poisoning of King Aerys in hopes of preventing a widespread war, but she found herself watching the realm slip toward conflict nonetheless. Only this war might wear a different mask. The mask of romantic grievance, of outraged honor, and of offended alliance. In Highgarden's great solar, she stood by a tall window, drinking in the green sweep of meadows stretching toward the horizon. The Mander glinted in the midday sun, its waters broad and placid. Her son, Mace Tyrell, hovered near the doorway. He was clad in a doublet of pale green velvet trimmed with gold thread, shoulders padded in the newest style. A broad man with a pleasant enough face, Mace nevertheless had a tendency to puff himself up like a pheasant, eager to assert importance despite lacking the subtlety for deeper politics. He cleared his throat loudly to announce himself, though she'd already sensed his presence. "Mother," he began, "we've received fresh tidings from Old Town and from King's Landing, and from the north." She turned, giving him a keen look. "Speak." His chest swelled, as though delivering weighty matters was a proud burden he alone could bear. "Ser Gyleon Flowers returned from Old Town just this morning. The Hightowers, I'm told, are uneasy. They've caught wind of a rumor that Lord Eddard Stark is preparing for something bigger than a mere protest. Men are being called up in the north, steel forging day and night in Winterfell's forges, or so they say. The same is happening in the Stormlands. Robert Baratheon has supposedly summoned every bannerman he can muster." Mace shifted on his feet. "He's claiming that the king dishonored him beyond repair by insulting his betrothal. Some speak of Robert calling it theft." Olenna pursed her lips. "Theft of his bride or theft of his honor? I suppose it's much the same to that hot-blooded fool. And from the crown. Word from the Red Keep says the king has not renounced anything. He has not declared open war, nor has he tried to pacify Robert with concessions. Instead, he's declared that the matter is a personal misunderstanding and that no reason exists for bloodshed." Mace paused, frowning as though the concept baffled him. "But if there's no reason, why are the Stormlands calling banners? Why are the Northmen forging steel?" Olenna shook her head. "Because King Rhaegar has proven he does not understand the hearts of men as well as he understands old scrolls and dusty prophecy. He offers them poetic, cryptic words while they measure slights and debts in the language of swords. If he truly believes this blow to Robert's pride is a mere misunderstanding, then he does not know Robert Baratheon at all." She allowed a brief, mirthless smile. "The man is all passion, that one. He may have tired of Elaya's plight or overlooked the question of the Martells, but to spit on Robert's betrothal? That's another matter entirely." Mace's brow furrowed. "So, do we side with the Targaryens in this if it comes to open war? The Tyrells have always—" She raised a hand sharply, cutting him off. "The Tyrells have always been pragmatic, Mace. We served the Targaryens because they were strong enough to keep us in our place, but also reliant on the bread our fields produce. That was an arrangement that suited both parties. Now we face a precarious choice." She gave him a steady gaze. "We must judge carefully which way the winds blow. If Robert secures alliances with the North, the Vale, and perhaps others, he might present a formidable challenge to a king whose hold on loyalty is tenuous. Dorne is furious and might break with the crown if Elia is set aside. The Lannisters remain in question. Tywin is as silent and watchful as a cat poised to pounce." Mace's cheeks reddened. "But that's all well and good for you to say, Mother. How do we decide? Do we call our bannermen for the king? Or do we stand aside until the outcome is certain? Some are already grumbling that House Tyrell looks weak if we do nothing." "Let them grumble for now," Olenna replied. "It's better they gossip about us dithering than charge blindly into a war we might lose. We are strong, but the realm is large, and the Targaryens are not as beloved as once they were. Recall, too, the memory of the Reach in earlier rebellions. We marched for the dragons once and were humbled at the Field of Fire. We marched for them again in later conflicts and found ourselves overshadowed by more cunning lords. For now we watch. We prepare. We strengthen our defenses. Yes, but we do not publicly declare for either side." He gave a resigned nod, though clearly the notion of subtlety did not sit well with his desire for bold theatrics. "I'll see to it. We have enough grain stored, and the harvest looks promising. We could feed a large army if it comes to that. Or starve one." Olenna allowed herself a small smile. "Exactly, my dear son, and that leverage might be more powerful than 1,000 swords. Wars are won or lost as much by bread as by steel." When Mace took his leave, Olenna stepped back to the window. The fields were beautiful. The mander gleamed in tranquil sunlight. It almost felt cruel that such splendor could be the stage for a potential war. She took a breath, letting the rose-scented air fill her lungs. If war came, it would tear through these lands. Even if it did not reach Highgarden's gates, the Riverlands or Stormlands would see blood, and it would be their grain wagons that the Tyrells either allowed to pass or left to starve. Such choices weighed heavily, but she had made her decision the moment she put poison in Aerys' wine. Once one wades into the Game of Thrones at that level, one cannot simply walk away. In the following weeks, ravens bearing anxious tidings multiplied. They spoke of tension in the Vale, where Lord Jon Arryn was said to waver between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to Robert Baratheon, who was almost like a son to him. They spoke of House Martell fortifying Sunspear and controlling the passes with renewed vigilance. Prince Doran had not publicly denounced the king, but he had resigned from the handship, citing his sister's ill health. That alone sent an unmistakable message of protest. Men with a mind for warfare could see how quickly the entire realm might fracture if a single blow was struck in anger. Rumors also flew about King Rhaegar himself. Some said he had locked himself in the Red Keep's library for days on end, refusing to see anyone but a handful of confidants. Maester Aemon arrived from Old Town by special invitation, an unprecedented journey for one so old. Others insisted Rhaegar had quietly taken Lyanna Stark into some secret lodging in King's Landing to woo her away from Robert. Still others claimed Rhaegar had traveled north incognito, leaving a double at court so that none would realize he was gone. Perhaps only Varys, the master of whisperers, knew the truth. The realm buzzed with speculation, and tension mounted as each rumor contradicted the last. Olenna Tyrell continued to play her part shrewdly. Letters arrived from Loras Tyrell, her grandson, still a child in this timeline, though promising in skill with the sword, letting her know he was thriving under the tutelage of capable masters at arms. She sometimes found comfort in glimpses of a simpler future, hoping that whatever conflict erupted would be over and done by the time Loras was grown. Yet she had no illusions. If House Tyrell chose poorly, they might find themselves on the losing side of a war. In that event, even the might of the Reach could crumble. One balmy evening, after a light supper of trout and fragrant white wine, Olenna lingered in Highgarden's rose garden. Moonlight silvered the petals of pale blossoms, and the air carried a sweet hush. She often found that walking among the roses at night helped her think. The hush of the castle at that hour meant fewer interruptions, and her mind could wander through the labyrinth of courtly intrigue without constant demands. It was there, among the softly rustling rosebushes, that a servant came to her bearing a sealed scroll. The wax bore an unfamiliar crest, some lesser house sworn to the Targaryens, presumably. Olenna broke the seal, read the contents by the light of a small lantern, and felt a cold coil tighten in her belly. The note was brief. "They say the king discovered a certain pot of seeds. If you value your house, be wary." No signature, no further detail. Yet the meaning was plain enough. Someone whispered that Rhaegar might suspect murder in King Aerys' death, or at least suspect that there was more to it than illness. The reference to seeds could be an allusion to poisons. Olenna's heart drummed a beat faster, though she kept her expression calm. Secrets seldom remained buried forever, especially in King's Landing. If Rhaegar had discovered evidence or if some other cunning power had laid a false trail pointing to House Tyrell, the consequences could be dire. She stood in the garden for a time, letting the night wind lift the ends of her cloak, swirling the scent of roses around her. It would do no good to panic. Paranoia was the game Aerys had played, and look how that ended. No, she needed a steady head, a plan. The realm was stumbling toward war. If the king indeed suspected House Tyrell, would he risk alienating one of his largest sources of bread and manpower on the eve of conflict with Robert Baratheon and possibly others? Perhaps not. Yet the Targaryens were known for their proud sense of vengeance when threatened. Rhaegar might see it as a moral imperative to punish the slayer of his father. Olenna had to prepare for that possibility. Early the next morning, she summoned several of her most trusted retainers and quietly gave orders to secure certain safeholds in the Reach, places where the Tyrell family could retreat if the worst occurred. She also sent a coded message to the Redwynes, whose fleet could be crucial for defense or escape. They had always been close allies of the Tyrells, connected by trade and mutual advantage. Highgarden might be a sumptuous fortress, but if faced with the combined might of a royal host, one needed fallback plans. Such measures were only prudent. Better to be prepared and never need it than to be caught unawares. Meanwhile, the realm's slow slide toward open conflict gained speed. Another batch of ravens arrived with news that Robert Baratheon had traveled to Riverrun, presumably to court an alliance with House Tully. Lord Hoster Tully had daughters of marriageable age, and rumor suggested that Robert might seek to rebetroth himself if the deal with Lyanna Stark was truly broken or overshadowed by Rhaegar's meddling. Eddard Stark, for his part, seemed bent on consolidating support in the north, though whether he sanctioned Robert's new betrothal or not was unclear. The Vale was divided. Jon Arryn had yet to publicly declare for either King Rhaegar or Robert Baratheon. But many knights of the Vale, younger men who had grown up beside Robert and Ned, leaned heavily toward their old companions. The question of the Lannisters loomed largest. Tywin Lannister had not forgiven old slights from the Targaryens. Yet Rhaegar had made half-hearted attempts to mend fences with him, praising Jaime's skill in the Kingsguard, offering trade benefits with Lannisport, and so on. Tywin remained non-committal. As Warden of the West, he held significant power. A simple nod of his head might tip the balance of the entire war, for the Westerlands had wealth and formidable armies. If Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark marched south, or if Dorne rose in anger, Tywin's decision could make or break the crown. For now, he was silent. Some said he was amassing men quietly. Others believed he was content to watch his enemies weaken one another. A cunning strategy if indeed war was inevitable. Then, late one evening, another startling bit of news reached Highgarden. Lyanna Stark had vanished from Winterfell. It was whispered that she was not abducted but had gone willingly, or that she had been snatched by Targaryen riders in the dead of night. The rumors varied. Some insisted Rhaegar had spirited her away to the Tower of Joy in the Dornish Mountains, though how that rumor was so specific so quickly no one could say. Others claimed she was hidden somewhere near Harrenhal. Whatever the truth, it was enough to stoke Robert Baratheon's fury to a fever pitch. Letters scalding with rage shot out from Storm's End and from Winterfell, demanding that King Rhaegar produce Lyanna Stark. The king maintained a cryptic silence. Did he have her at all? Or was this rumor a malicious falsehood? With Lyanna's disappearance, lines began to crystallize. Eddard Stark sent out the direwolf banners, summoning the North to war. Robert Baratheon, undone by anger and heartbreak, raised the black stag of Storm's End. Even the Vale stirred. Young knights flocked to Robert's cause. House Tully, with a new alliance forged by wedding Catelyn Tully to Eddard Stark, threw its considerable manpower behind the northern banners. Dorne, for the time being, seethed but did not openly declare for Robert. Elia Martell still lay abed in King's Landing, weakened, though her brother, Prince Oberyn, was rumored to be sharpening his spears. Prince Doran, more cautious, waited. King Rhaegar at last made a statement of sorts. He summoned royal forces to King's Landing to defend the rightful king and the peace of the realm. He did not mention Lyanna Stark publicly, nor did he disclaim the rumors. Jaime Lannister stayed close to him as Kingsguard, though the rest of the Lannisters remained in the west. Tywin wrote a single letter expressing concern for the stability of the kingdom and advising the king to restore the Lady Lyanna to her kin if she be in your possession. Rhaegar offered no public reply. Those who had once believed Rhaegar was a scholar king, too gentle for war, found themselves seeing a different side of him. When Robert's forces crushed a minor royal garrison near the King's Road, The king responded by dispatching dragon banners to burn the rebels' camp in a swift assault. It was not wildfire, nor was it the random cruelty of Aerys, but it was savage enough to make the realm tremble. Rhaegar was no feeble dreamer when roused to defend his power. Meanwhile, Olenna Tyrell watched from Highgarden as the kingdom slid toward the very war she had tried to avert by removing Aerys. Perhaps there had never been a chance for a bloodless future. Her letters from King's Landing, filtered through watchers she had placed in the city, spoke of the king's increasing fervor. Some said he was convinced that the union of Targaryen and Stark blood would fulfill an ancient prophecy, that the child born of such a union would save the realm from a greater darkness. Others claimed he had fallen genuinely in love with Lyanna Stark's wild northern spirit. Whatever the reason, Rhaegar was determined to keep her, consequences be damned. One crisp morning, in the shadow of Highgarden's high walls, Mace Tyrell came to Olenna in a state of agitation. He stood in her private solar, blotting sweat from his brow despite the moderate temperature. "Mother," he said urgently, "word has reached us that Robert and Ned Stark are marching south in earnest. They've combined forces with the Tullus. The Vale is wavering, but many knights have joined them anyway, tens of thousands all told. They plan to confront the king's host on the Trident or near Harrenhal. Meanwhile, King Rhaegar has gathered his men from the Crownlands, the Reach Lords who remain loyal, and some from the Stormlands who refuse to follow Robert's rebellion. He's even called upon the Dornish to fulfill their royal oaths, though Dorne has answered half-heartedly." Olenna pursed her lips. So the war is truly begun. She thought of the fields that would be stained red, of the villages that might be pillaged in the crossfire, of the families torn apart. For what? A question of honor, a swirl of prophecy, a vanished girl. And now House Tyrell must decide. Do we march for the king, as we did in old wars, or do we remain aloof? Or do we join Robert's cause? She tilted her head. The last seems unthinkable, given centuries of Targaryen ties, but Robert's cause is swelling. Mace bit his lip. Many of our bannermen clamor for the old tradition. We have always bent the knee to House Targaryen, but some, like the Tarleys, are uncertain. Randyll Tarly has a streak of stern practicality. He admires discipline and might see Robert's rebellion as an opportunity, especially if Robert can prove himself militarily. Tarly might slip away to Robert if he thinks the king is lost. Others, like the Hightowers, prefer to stay neutral as long as possible, but they will follow our lead. The Florents are eager for some grand alliance. Who knows how they might tilt if they see advantage elsewhere. The Redwines will watch how the wind blows, but they are shipping more wine than usual to the capital, likely for profit. If the crown has gold, they'll have the red wine casks. All are waiting on our word. Olenna let out a slow breath. We have no good choices, yet we may still salvage some advantage if we move cleverly. If the king should discover we were behind Aerys' death, he might come for us. But would he dare in the midst of a war? He needs the Reach's grain. On the other hand, if Robert wins and learns we supported the Targaryens, we might find ourselves cast down by the new regime. We must weigh the likely victor. Mace ran a hand through his graying hair. Who will it be, though? Rhaegar has the Crownlands, the Kingsguard, and presumably some portion of Dorne if he can keep Elaya's kin from turning on him. He might also gain the west if Tywin sides with him. But Robert has the north, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands, plus many knights of the Vale. That's a formidable host. She nodded. It is. And if Tywin Lannister decides to join Robert, that might be the end of the Targaryens entirely. A silence fell, broken only by the quiet crackle of the hearth fire. Olenna studied her son's face, her mind whirring with possibilities. For now, we call our bannermen to readiness, but we do not move. We shall send polite missives to Rhaegar, affirming we remain loyal to the throne, while not committing our armies in any large-scale muster. We will also send feelers to Robert's camp, quietly, suggesting that the Reach might remain out of the conflict unless provoked. Let them both think we are waiting upon developments. In truth, we are waiting to see who stands the better chance. Mace hesitated but nodded. And if the king demands we march with him, he might call us oathbreakers if we refuse. We'll keep a token force near the Rose Road, enough to look like we're preparing for the king's approach. But we won't mobilize the full might of the Reach, Olenna said. If Rhaegar complains, we can claim we're defending against possible Dornish attacks on our southern border. Let him juggle that problem. Mace left her presence with a resigned step, off to arrange the complicated half-measures of mobilization. Olenna tapped her finger on the window ledge, gazing out over the broad courtyard. She felt a pang of weariness. All the cunning in the world might not save them if the realm truly split itself in two. But she had always believed in forging her own fate, and that would not change now, war or no war. The war drums beat louder with each passing week. Robert's forces seized the crossroads near Harrenhal, while Rhaegar's royal host moved up the King's Road. The ominous rumor spread that they would meet near the Trident, an echo of events that, in another timeline, were famously bloody. The Riverlords loyal to House Tully offered support to Robert, providing knowledge of the terrain. Scouts reported sightings of the king's banners, bright with the three-headed dragon, encamped along the southern banks of the Green Fork. No one doubted a major battle was brewing. Amid these alarming tidings, Olenna received a coded letter from one of her informants in King's Landing, a lowly scribe in the royal archives who owed her many favors. The letter was lengthy, rife with details about the king's council sessions, but one line stood out. They say Rhaegar has become more severe by the day, snapping at advisors who question his quest for the Stark girl. Grand Maester Pycelle urges caution, but the king listens more to certain private voices. Perhaps the eunuch? Or perhaps his own father's ghost. That last phrase chilled Olenna. The specter of Aerys, quite literally or metaphorically, haunted the Red Keep. If Rhaegar believed, as some Targaryens once had, that his father's spirit or the spirits of old Targaryen kings guided him, then he might be drifting toward fanaticism. In that scenario, rational pleas would fall on deaf ears. She offered a silent prayer to the Seven that if Rhaegar was truly lost in prophecy, he would still have enough sense to avoid the worst atrocities. And if not, well, the realm might burn. Finally, the fateful confrontation arrived. The armies clashed on the banks of the Trident in early morning light. Olenna, safe in Highgarden, received word by Raven days later, but the scale of the slaughter was apparent even in the first frantic reports. Thousands died in the swirling waters as men fought chest-deep in the current, battered by swords, hammers, and axes. Banners stained with blood drifted downstream. Robert Baratheon, it was said, led his vanguard personally, swinging his great warhammer with unstoppable fury. Tales from survivors claimed he met King Rhaegar in single combat amid the chaos. Some said Rhaegar was resplendent in black armor decorated with rubies shaped like a dragon's heart. Others insisted he wore only simple plate of dull gray, unadorned. The one consistent detail was that the two men clashed in a brutal duel. Robert's hammer struck Rhaegar's breastplate, caving it in and scattering rubies, if indeed there were rubies, into the river. The king fell, mortally wounded, and the rebels roared in triumph. The royal host, bereft of its commander, shattered and fled. Within days, ravens streaked across the skies. King Rhaegar Targaryen was dead on the Trident. Robert Baratheon emerged as the hero of the hour, the man who slew the Dragon Prince. The realm reeled. Queen Elia Martell, too ill to move from her chambers, had lost her husband, though in truth he had considered it setting her aside. The question on every lip was, what next? The Targaryen children were still alive in King's Landing. Prince Viserys, a boy of around 8 or 9 named heir after Rhaegar, and the infant Daenerys, barely old enough to walk. Would Robert kill them, as was rumored he intended? Would the Martells defend them? Would Tywin Lannister swoop in to decide the fate of the city? Olenna Tyrell immediately saw the danger. If Robert pressed his advantage, he could besiege King's Landing. With Rhaegar gone, there was no strong Targaryen adult to rally the loyalists. Viserys was a child. Aerys was long dead. Some diehard Targaryen loyalists might fight on, but morale had been shattered by the defeat on the Trident. The main question was whether Robert's fury would extend to houses that remained nominally loyal to the throne, including the Tyrells. Olenna had not sent her armies to the Trident, so their hands were not stained with Robert's blood or that of his allies. But they had also not stood against Rhaegar. They had effectively stayed out of it. For a moment, she allowed herself relief. Perhaps that neutrality would shield them. If Robert took the throne, he might appreciate that the Tyrells had not fielded a massive host against him. At the same time, she worried that Robert's hatred for all Targaryens might seep into hatred for those who once served them. It was a tangled web. When the news of the battle's outcome solidified, Rhaegar's body recovered from the water, Robert triumphant. Olenna convened her most trusted advisors in a quiet Highgarden council. Mace Tyrell, Randyll Tarly, Leo Tyrell, a distant cousin who oversaw certain finances, and a few others gathered around a polished wooden table set in a small, round chamber lit by stained glass windows depicting flowers and vines. No grand banners were displayed. Olenna wanted no prying eyes. She opened the discussion. It appears King Rhaegar is dead. Robert Baratheon is the likely victor, with the north, the Riverlands, and parts of the Vale behind him. The Crown's forces are scattered. The question is, does he march on King's Landing to depose Viserys, or to kill him outright? And how do we respond? Randyll Tarly, a rigid man with close-cropped hair and a stern countenance, spoke first. "My lady, if Robert takes the city, he will claim the throne. By right of conquest, perhaps. The Targaryen line, in practical terms, would be done. If any among them lives, they will be exiles at best, unless some powerful house stands by them. We could, theoretically, move our armies in an attempt to prop up Viserys, but that might pit us against Robert's unstoppable host. After the victory on the Trident, they have momentum." Mace nodded in somber agreement. "Yes, that would be folly. We'd be seen as the last bastion of Targaryen resistance, and Robert would come down on us like the hammer he favors. The question is, do we do nothing, or do we declare for Robert quickly so as to ingratiate ourselves with the new order?" Olenna tapped her fingers against the table's smooth surface. "Declaring too quickly might be unseemly, especially if the city hasn't fallen yet. The Lannisters remain uncommitted. If Tywin arrives at King's Landing with his army and rescues the city from chaos, he might install himself in a position of power. We should watch him carefully. But yes, do nothing for too long, and we may forfeit any leverage we might have with Robert." An uneasy quiet settled. At last, Tarly spoke again, his tone measured. "We could muster the Reach's strength and move toward the Rose Road, stopping short of the city. Then, if Tywin or Robert secures King's Landing, we can gauge which way the wind blows and act accordingly. Show ourselves as a force that wishes to restore peace, not necessarily to fight. That might allow us to cut a deal with whomever emerges in control." Mace harumphed. "That might be the best course. We can approach Robert from a position of strength. He'd be less likely to punish us if he sees we command tens of thousands of swords." Olenna gave a single firm nod. "Very well. Raise the banners. Call our forces together, but instruct them to move cautiously up the Rose Road in separate columns, so it doesn't look like an invasion force. Let the small folk see that we intend no harm. Issue proclamations that House Tyrell is maintaining order in the south and ensuring no brigands spill over from the war. Meanwhile, we'll send emissaries to both Robert and Tywin, expressing our desire to see a swift end to the conflict and the safety of King's Landing." The men rose to their feet, each bowing respectfully. Olenna remained seated a moment longer, pressing her fingertips together. So it had come to this. She could not help recalling the night she'd poured poison into Aerys' wine. She had thought to avert a catastrophic war, but the Targaryens, it seemed, were bent on bringing ruin upon themselves, and possibly upon all who touched them. Yet perhaps this was not wholly a tragedy. Perhaps, if the right alliances were forged, the war might end sooner and with less bloodshed than if the Mad King had burned everything. Even now, she tried to find a sliver of justification. Within days, Tyrell armies began to coalesce. Banners bearing the Golden Rose fluttered along the roads. House Tarly arrived with disciplined troops, House Florent with a haughty retinue, the Hightowers with a gleaming array of knights. The Redwynes prepared their fleet to guard the Mander's mouth. All told, it was a formidable force, though no single muster. Olenna oversaw the logistics from Highgarden, though Mace Tyrell rode at the head of the host, self-importantly proclaiming he would see to the defense of the realm. She tolerated his bombast because it suited the illusions they wished to project. Amid these preparations, new ravens arrived detailing the rapid fall of King's Landing. They said Tywin Lannister had marched on the city with a massive host, pretending loyalty to the crown. Grand Maester Pycelle convinced the boy King Viserys and the royal advisors to open the gates. Once inside, Lannister men sacked parts of the city, although it was unclear whether they did so under Tywin's orders or in the chaos of entry. Some particularly dire rumors claimed that the remnants of the Targaryen family were in peril. Prince Viserys and Princess Daenerys might be whisked away, possibly by loyal retainers, or they might be at Tywin's mercy. Elia Martell and her children, Rhaenys and Aegon, were in even greater danger. The Martells had few defenders left in the capital after Rhaegar's defeat. It was whispered that Tywin's bannermen, led by Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch, committed unspeakable acts in the Red Keep in an attempt to prove their fealty to Robert Baratheon by eradicating the Targaryen line. If the rumors were true, it was a horror even the Mad King would have cringed at. When Robert arrived at the city shortly thereafter, blood was said to be staining the stones, and the lion sigil flew over the main gates. The Targaryen cause lay in ruins. Robert Baratheon might soon be crowned king by right of conquest, albeit overshadowed by the brutality of the Lannister entry. The realm's ravens crackled with contradictory accounts. Some insisted Robert was furious at Tywin's brutality, others that he was secretly pleased, as it removed any Targaryen pretenders. Ned Stark, so the stories said, was outraged at the slaughter of Rhaegar's wife and children, if indeed they had been put to death. Tensions ran high even among the victors. Olenna Tyrell's vantage was once again that of a wary observer. With King's Landing in Robert's hands, or Tywin's, there was little point in mustering the Tyrell host any farther up the Rose Road. Instead, Mace Tyrell halted near Bitterbridge and sent riders to approach Robert, offering formal congratulations on his victory and an invitation to peace. Olenna penned the letter herself, carefully couched in flowery language about serving the realm's stability. She made no mention of loyalties declared in the past or the Targaryen cause. Her hope was that Robert, in his new role as victor, would be willing to accept a swift oath of fealty from House Tyrell, allowing them to keep their lands and titles without punishment. It seemed that events moved more quickly than anyone could have foreseen. Within a fortnight, another raven arrived. Robert Baratheon had been declared king of the Undulls and the First Men, protector of the realm. The High Septon in the Great September of Baelor had placed a crown upon his black curls. Though rumor said Robert scowled through much of the ceremony, troubled by the carnage in the Red Keep and the uncertain fate of Lyanna Stark, who still had not been located. Some insisted she was in captivity somewhere, possibly died in childbirth, or had run away on her own. Nobody knew for certain. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister stood at Robert's side, richly dressed, with a face like marble. If Robert was king in name, Tywin's guiding hand was all too visible in the early arrangements of the new regime. For the Tyrells, the next step was crucial. Mace traveled to King's Landing with a sizable retinue and was among the first major lords of the Reach to kneel before the new king. In a hall that still smelled faintly of smoke and blood, with half the tapestries burned or torn, Mace bent his knee and proclaimed his loyalty to House Baratheon. Olenna did not attend in person, believing she was better served staying in Highgarden, tending the home front. Yet she heard every detail once Mace returned. Robert, it was said, accepted the fealty, though with a certain wariness. At his side stood Ned Stark, also ill at ease, and behind them Tywin Lannister and the newly formed small council. The realm had been turned inside out, and everyone was still picking up the pieces. When Mace asked for reassurance that the Tyrells would retain their titles and lands as Lords Paramount of the Reach, Robert looked at Tywin, then at Ned. Finally, Robert said, in his booming voice, "You kept your swords out of my back, even if you didn't put them at my side. That's better than many can claim. You'll keep your seat, so long as you bend the knee." Then he added, in a softer tone, "We'll need the Reach's harvests to feed the realm through the coming winter. If you're wise, you'll supply us generously." That was the gist of it. Mace complied eagerly. House Tyrell kept its rank, its lands, and presumably some measure of favor, though that favor was fragile. Olenna considered it a victory, yet she knew the new king and his circle might have long memories, and that some might question the Tyrells' half-hearted loyalty. Still, for the moment, Highgarden was safe. The Targaryens, for all intents and purposes, were done. In the months that followed, Robert's regime solidified. He named Jon Arryn as his hand, bridging the old bond that had begun when Robert was a ward in the Vale. Tywin Lannister, apparently satisfied with being recognized as savior of the capital, returned to Casterly Rock with a high position of influence. Ned Stark lingered in King's Landing for a time, then departed in somber haste. Rumor said he found his sister Lyanna gravely ill at a guarded location, some half-collapsed tower near the Dornish marches. She died soon after, though not before extracting a promise from Ned about something that no one fully understood. Robert was inconsolable for a time, drowning himself in drink, though at length he took comfort in the arms of many women. The realm whispered that the new king was already on a path of revelry and indulgence, but at least it was not madness or cruelty like Aerys. Olenna Tyrell watched all these changes from Highgarden, sending polite messages of congratulation and support to King Robert. She made sure caravans of grain and fresh produce reached King's Landing promptly, cementing the idea that the Tyrells were vital partners in feeding the realm. Behind the scenes, she worked to fortify Tyrell influence in court. She arranged matches for younger cousins, suggested alliances to Mace that might bind the Reach more tightly to Robert's new order. If ever the truth of Aerys' demise by poison threatened to surface, she hoped these alliances would deter Robert from seeking a scapegoat. The realm was reeling from enough bloodshed. Perhaps no one would thirst for old conspiracies. In the midst of the uneasy peace, word drifted in about the scattered Targaryens. Some said Prince Viserys and Princess Daenerys had been smuggled out of the city by loyalists and whisked across the narrow sea, into exile. The Martells, for their part, nursed deep wounds. Elia Martell and her children were rumored to have been slaughtered in the sack of King's Landing, though conflicting accounts said that the boy Aegon might have been switched with another infant. Oberyn Martell and Doran Martell seethed in Dorne, outraged at Robert, at Tywin, at the Lannisters, at the entire turn of events. Dorne had not openly rebelled yet, but the threat simmered. Robert's hold on the throne might be tested again if Dorne refused to bend the knee. For the moment, Jon Arryn strove to make peace, hoping to avoid more war. When the first official gathering of Robert's new court convened in King's Landing, Olenna Tyrell made the journey. Mace was already there, having lingered to ensure the Tyrell presence. The capital was a changed place. The red dragon banners replaced by the stag, many of the old Targaryen emblems torn down or defaced. Soldiers wearing the crowned stag patrolled the streets. Yet the people who scurried through Flea Bottom looked much the same, thin, weary, battered by the aftershocks of war. The Red Keep still bore signs of the sack: burned sections, broken windows, and new construction crews working to restore it. Olenna arrived at the keep in a carriage escorted by Tyrell knights. She disembarked, greeted at the gate by a stern-faced Kingsguard knight she did not recognize. Once inside, she noticed that the throne room had been partially refurbished. Repairs were underway, scaffolding rising to fix damaged columns. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed as always. Robert Baratheon, thickly muscled and wearing a hastily fashioned crown, sat on the throne's edge, as though he were not entirely comfortable with its spiky metal arms. She made her reverence along with a small group of southern lords. Robert's face was less boyish than it had been. A short beard framed his mouth. He looked exhausted, and the smell of wine hung about him even this early in the day. Ned Stark stood to one side, expression subdued. Jon Arryn was near the foot of the throne, flanked by a retinue of scribes. Nearby, Varys hovered in his silken robes, and Peter Baelish, someone Olenna had heard rumors about, lurked with a cunning smile, newly appointed to the realm's finances. When her turn came to speak, Olenna offered courtesies. "Your Grace," she said, voice echoing in the half-repaired hall. "Highgarden sends its humble loyalty. May the rains fall kindly on your fields. and the golden harvest fill your tables." Robert rubbed his eyes. "Well enough. We'll need that harvest," he said in his resonant voice, though she noted the slur of tiredness or drink. "We thank you, Lady Olenna. The realm is battered, but we'll restore it. You've come at a good time. We need wise minds and enough gold to pay for repairs." He gave a coarse laugh, though there was little humor in it. She offered a polite smile. "We are at your service, Your Grace." Jon Arryn stepped forward, ever the courteous older statesman. "My lord, Lady Olenna is known for her keen understanding of statecraft. I recommend we hear her suggestions regarding the southern trade routes and how best to replenish the city's granaries. The war has taken its toll." Robert waved a hand. Yes, talk to her. You and Pycelle and whoever else. My head aches. Too many damned ravens, too many issues of law and order. Let's finish this business so we can drink." That was the shape of the new court. A king who had won his throne by prowess on the battlefield, but who might lack the stamina or inclination for the daily grind of governance. Jon Arryn and Ned Stark carried the heavier burdens, with Tywin Lannister absent but still powerful from the west. Others, like Varys and Baelish, worked behind the scenes. Olenna recognized that in such an environment, she could wield considerable influence, so long as she avoided stepping on Tywin's toes and gave Robert no reason to suspect her of duplicity. She spent the next fortnight engaged in countless meetings. She advised the crown on raising levies from the southern domains, on stabilizing the price of grain, on encouraging shipping lanes in and out of the Mandor. She also gleaned tidbits of information from the labyrinth of back corridors. Varys, with his disconcerting smile, dropped by her chambers once with an oblique inquiry about how fortunate the Tyrells were not to suffer any direct losses in the war. Olenna parried the remarks deftly. She had no intention of letting the spider glean her darkest secret. Baelish, too, introduced himself with sly flattery, praising her cunning and dropping hints that he might do business with the Reach. She kept him at arm's length, unsure of his motivations. Every so often, she spied the new king wandering the halls, a flagon of ale in hand, bellowing at servants or chortling at a jest. The haunting presence of the Targaryens had been swept away, yet the realm felt far from at peace. Dorne simmered with resentment. The Iron Islands eyed the weakened kingdom with ambition. The Lannisters were ascendant, flush with pride at having placed Robert on the throne, but eager to secure more power. The Stormlands exulted in Robert's triumph, but in the north, House Stark was uneasy about the fate of Lyanna. All told, it was a tapestry of grudges, alliances, and unspoken tensions. Olenna believed that House Tyrell's best path was to solidify a strong position under this new order. If that meant forging a marriage alliance, so be it. If it meant funneling coin to the capital, she would ensure the Tyrell coffers remained open just enough to make them indispensable. Above all, she wanted to keep suspicion of Aerys' poisoning buried. If the new king discovered that the Tyrells had orchestrated the death of his predecessor, it might not matter that he despised Aerys. Regicide was a crime that kings rarely forgave, for it set a dangerous precedent. So she walked lightly, weaving courtesy and cunning in equal measure. Summer wore on, the days long and hot, the sky a blazing blue above the Red Keep. Workmen continued to fix the walls, though more slowly than one might hope. Robert's coffers were already strained from the war. One evening, Olenna took a solitary stroll through the castle gardens, near the scrawny lemon trees that reminded her vaguely of her own rose gardens back home. The air was thick with the hum of insects. Torchlight flickered along the walls. She heard a faint footstep behind her and turned to see Varys, slipping through the shadows with unnerving grace. "Good evening, Lady Olenna," he said in that soft, measured voice. He bowed, hands folded within his voluminous sleeves. She offered a tight smile. "You appear as quietly as a cat, Lord Varys. Or should I say Master of Whisperers?" He spread his palms. "Merely a mouse scurrying in the dark, my lady. I came upon you by chance." "Indeed," she doubtfully raised an eyebrow. "And what chance brings you out in these gardens so late?" "News from across the narrow sea," he said lightly. "People speak of Dragonspawn living in exile, searching for allies. These are uncertain times. One never knows how quickly ambition might sail over to our shores. The new king sits uneasy upon the throne. Olenna tilted her head. A fair observation. And what do you require of me, Master Varys? I suspect you rarely make social calls with no aim. He sighed almost theatrically. It pleases me only to remind you, my lady, that while the war is won, the realm is not yet stable. King Robert has good steel and a good heart, but one might question his sense of caution. If other Targaryen claimants were to appear, we could face new strife. His dark eyes flickered. I merely hope that the families of the realm, particularly those who have unique knowledge of how the Targaryens fell, might remain vigilant. The realm cannot endure another savage war so soon. She took his meaning instantly. A slight chill crawled up her spine. So he was implying that he knew or suspected that Aerys' end had been no accident, and that if another Targaryen ever tried to reclaim the throne, the Tyrells might have reason to stand firmly with Robert. Otherwise, the truth might come out. One war is too many for a generation, she said, summoning a calm tone. I have no wish to see another. Varys inclined his head, a faint smile on his lips. I am delighted we are of the same mind, Lady Olenna. Rest assured, I will do whatever I can to keep the realm's secrets, so long as such secrecy serves the greater good. Shall we part as friends? Her gaze was flinty, but she gave a brief nod. Friends, then, and pray the realm remains at peace. He bowed once more and slipped away into the shadows. She stood there a moment longer, letting her heart's pace slow. The game was never over, she reminded herself. It only changed shape. Varys was a keeper of secrets, and he would use them to preserve what he believed best for the realm, or best for himself. She must keep House Tyrell secure enough that no one, not even the spider, could profit from exposing them. She returned to Highgarden soon after, having done all she could to ensure the Tyrell's place in Robert's new order. The roads were busier now, with more merchants and travelers venturing forth in the hope that peace would hold. She passed farmland still showing scars of levies taken by the war, villages missing their young men. Yet the land was fertile and would recover if left in peace. Within the castle walls of Highgarden, she was greeted by more reassuring sights. The old orchard, the lively kitchens, and halls echoing with the voices of servants and courtiers who had not known the horrors up close. In the months that followed, Robert's reign took shape. He married Cersei Lannister, sealing the alliance with House Lannister that had effectively put him on the throne. The wedding was a lavish affair. Lannister gold decorated every surface, and the couple was displayed for the realm to see. Olenna attended the festivities, observing how Robert looked already a bit bored, how Cersei's green eyes glimmered with ambition. Tywin, of course, wore a triumphant expression, having placed his daughter on the throne as queen. Ned Stark stood off to the side, looking pensive, while Jon Arryn orchestrated the event with stately elegance. None of it pleased Dorne, still mourning Elia Martell and her children, but Robert and Jon Arryn did what they could to smooth tensions by sending apologies, offers of tribute, and the blame cast upon Rhaegar Clegane and a handful of others. King Robert, it was said, disliked such cruelty and wished to show mercy to the Martells, but Oberyn was not easily placated. The seeds of future strife lay buried in the dunes of Dorne, waiting to sprout. After the royal wedding, life in the capital settled into a new kind of normal. Lavish feasts, hunts, the churn of scandal. King Robert indulged in drinking and carousing. The small council wrestled with finances, trying to rebuild the war-ravaged treasury. Lords and ladies vied for favor in this new Baratheon court. Through it all, Olenna Tyrell visited periodically but preferred the comfort and safety of Highgarden. She wrote letters advising Mace on how to keep the Tyrell influence afloat, championing Marjorie's future prospects at court, once she was old enough, establishing new trade pacts with the crown, and fostering the idea that the Reach remained the backbone of the realm's bread supply. Quietly, she also expanded her network of spies and informants. One never knew what secrets might emerge from the old Targaryen loyalists or from exiled princes overseas. If Viserys and Daenerys still lived, they might one day return, and the secret of Aerys's poisoning might reappear in their retinue of outraged partisans. Olenna refused to be caught off guard. As the years went by, the realm experienced a measure of peace, albeit a tense one. The northern lords returned to Winterfell, the Riverlands focused on rebuilding, the Vale looked inward, and the Stormlands basked in their king's triumph. The Reach remained prosperous, shipping grain by the barge load to the capital. Cersei bore Robert children, though rumors abounded about their parentage and the king's infidelities. Ned Stark left King's Landing for good, uneasy with the king's ways and the Lannisters' growing hold. Tywin managed the Westerlands, always looking for ways to enhance House Lannister's power. The small folk, for the most part, were merely thankful the devastation of war had ended. Olenna Tyrell found her days back in Highgarden once again filled with the details of estate management. She guided Mace through negotiations with lesser lords, presided over her gardens, and played host to traveling bards or merchants. Yet a faint restlessness lived in her heart. She had changed the course of history by killing the Mad King, and the realm had still nearly boiled over in war. Thousands had died on the Trident, in the sack of King's Landing, and in scattered battles across the land. The Targaryens were gone, replaced by a new dynasty that might, in time, prove just as troublesome. Robert was no tyrant, but he had his weaknesses: drink, women, a short temper, and the Lannisters behind him possessed their own brand of ruthless ambition. And so she wondered, more than once, whether her deed had truly saved the realm from a greater conflagration or merely replaced one brand of destruction with another. The Targaryen mania had been extinguished, but the politics remained as savage as ever. And if Viserys or Daenerys returned one day with foreign armies, the realm might erupt again. The only solace she found lay in the knowledge that at least the Mad King had not succeeded in burning half of Westeros. The war that did break out had been narrower, briefer than the catastrophic nightmare she had feared under Aerys. That, at least she told herself, was worth something. Highgarden's courtyards filled with the scent of blooming roses as she walked one late afternoon with her granddaughter Marjorie toddling at her side. The child clutched Olenna's hand, giggling at the bright petals and the bees buzzing about. The future of House Tyrell, she thought. That was what every grandmother wanted to safeguard. Perhaps, in time, Marjorie might even become a queen or a great lady at court, forging alliances that would keep the Reach secure through whatever storms came next. Olenna found a quiet gratification in that hope. Even if the Game of Thrones never truly ended, House Tyrell would endure. They had weathered the Targaryens, the Baratheons, the Lannisters, and they would weather whatever came after. Now and then, she felt the weight of the memory. The hush of the feast hall in the Red Keep, King Aerys' wild eyes reflected in the torchlight, the subtle slip of poison into his cup. She saw his cough, his last suspicious glance, and the knowledge that she had set everything that followed into motion. But whenever the guilt stirred, she reminded herself of all the innocents who might have been burned alive if Aerys had continued, the entire realm that might have been drowned in wildfire. It was a harsh calculus, but in Westeros it was the only one that mattered. She had shaped history. That was done. Sometimes, at twilight, she climbed to a high balcony in Highgarden's tallest tower, where she could see the horizon stretch for miles. The fields shimmered gold in late summer, the slow-moving Mander catching the sun's dying rays. In the distance, one might see the silhouettes of villages and manors, the smoke of hearth fires rising gently. A peaceful sight, one that gave no hint of the wars or intrigues that had racked the realm. She would stand there, arms folded, letting the breeze tug at her shawl, wondering if Rhaegar had truly believed he could save the realm through prophecy, or if Robert now believed he could rule it by the weight of his hammer and crown. In the end, men believed many things, but the land endured, shaped by those who had the cunning or the nerve to act at decisive moments. One day, perhaps, bards would spin some song about the transition of power from the Targaryens to the Baratheons, about Robert's victory on the Trident, about the horrors in King's Landing, about the reign that followed. They would weave in Rhaegar's tragic romance, Lyanna Stark's fate, the bitterness of Dorne, the cunning of Tywin Lannister. Perhaps they would even hint at the mysterious death of King Aerys and the swirling rumors of poison. But Olenna Tyrell doubted they would ever guess the truth of her hand in it. Bards preferred gallant knights and tragic princes, not the discreet interventions of an old woman with a keen mind, and that was well enough for her. She had no desire for songs, only results. As the golden sun dipped below the horizon, she let the faint hush of evening descend around her, petal soft. The voices of the castle drifted up, cooks calling in the kitchens, stable boys tending horses, distant laughter from the guard barracks. Life went on as it always did. Even in Westeros, where war could flare in a heartbeat, people had to eat, to sleep, to sing lullabies, and to bury their dead. In that sense, the realm belonged neither to Targaryens nor to Baratheons nor to Lannisters, but to time itself, and to those canny enough to survive. She turned away from the view, the soft swish of her gown echoing in the still air, and descended the tower stairs. The future stretched out before her, uncertain but no longer overshadowed by the Mad King's tyranny. The lords and ladies of the realm, with all their petty feuds and grand ambitions, would continue the dance. Olenna Tyrell, as ever, would watch, plan, and protect her own. If the chaos arose again, she would face it. After all, she had already proven she was capable of shaping destiny with the flick of a poisoned crystal in a single cup of wine. For the moment, though, she sought only the quiet comfort of her rooms. The game would continue at dawn, but for now, she would grant herself the luxury of a night's rest, content, if not entirely at peace, with the world she had helped forge.